Hit the button.
All right, we're live. Hi there, everybody. My name's John Anderholm.
And I'm Jeff Alcantara here at Real Effects, a sister studio with Flight School. We at Real Effects we often work with Flight School on VR projects, and we just recently finished Son of Jaguar, which is a short film, a new short film from Jorge Gutierrez, who directed Book of Life. And this is all part of Google Spotlight Stories, so we did the VR short for them. It is available now on Steam, so if you have access there, you should go check it out. But also, coming November 17th, it will be available on the Google Spotlight Stories app for iOS and Android, so make sure you grab it when it's available then. We're really excited to make sure that you guys all get a chance to see it. So Flight School invited us to come chat with you guys about our work on Son of Jaguar and kind of some of the challenges that we faced and how we basically tackled those. Just to kind of set the table, this all started with an idea from Jorge. It's a very personal story to him, and he basically presented us with the story of a aging luchador wrestler as he is going into his last match, basically wrestling with his legacy, his mortality, and his relationship with his family. So we knew that this was a very personal story, so it's something we really wanted to make sure that we worked with Jorge and found a way to translate it. And it was basically all, working in VR was new to us, it was new to Jorge, so it was basically a lot of us learning together, working with our flight school people to basically find a way to tell this story. So we started basically how we would normally do any kind of 2D theatrical feature or short film with an animatic. And Jorge worked with editorial and storyboard artists and basically came up with this story. And then it was up to us to basically work through it and figure out how we were going to take that instead of being a flat theatrical presentation, to a VR experience. And basically what it really ended up being is us trying a whole bunch of things, finding out what we liked, what worked, and what basically served the story, so that we also always had a place that was our source of where we were getting our information, what was driving decisions. All of it was from the story. So it all basically started with Jorge, and it was up to us to execute his vision and find the best way to tell the story in VR, which was a lot of testing and trying things.
That is the overarching theme of our experiences. How do we take this studio full of really talented people who've only done cinema up to this point, and how do we apply their talents and do this new thing, which is VR, which takes everything you're used to and just turns it up on its head. And so, like you said, we tried a lot of things failed. But if you're not failing, you're not progressing, you're not moving forward, you're not learning. And so that's kind of the overarching theme of this is how we apply all these raw, really good, talented artists to this new field.
And so a lot of kind of what basically the initial challenge that we had was basically to get that first step of taking this animatic and put it into VR so we can start working with it. So, our older workflow was basically going through layout artists, where they would take a look at the boards, take a look at the animatic, and actually go through and do a layout pass where they would establish basically where the characters were, set up cameras, lenses, timing, all that stuff would be set up there. So our first challenge was basically to figure out what layout really meant for VR. So a lot of times when you're thinking of a layout artist, the first thing you think of is camera. And there is a camera in VR, but it's not the same type of camera. You're basically more in VR, you're more in charge of setting everything up so that the viewer can kind of view it wherever they want, whether they're standing, sitting, they might look behind, which is kind of against everything that a layout artist thinks about. So it was a huge challenge for our layout artists to kind of take this on. And they were the ones, I feel like, of all of our production groups that had to make the biggest change. We started calling them layout artists, but as soon as we took that thing into VR, we realized that that's not a very good descriptor, so we started calling them story architects. And so kind of the first way we approached it is, Son of Jaguar is a story about a wrestling match. It starts with Son of Jaguar in one location in the boiler room, making his way down to this fight, and where he fights his rival, Lord Calavera. So the first thing we did was what we thought we should do is basically take all the cuts and shots from the animatic and put them into VR and see what it looked like when we're moving the camera, the positions around. And what we had to end up exploring is what are cuts in VR and how does that actually translate to taking an animatic and converting it over. So during some kind of fight scene, you're using cuts to basically stage action, get the viewer to look where you want to, show a reaction of someone getting hit, show a reaction of anticipation. Well, in VR, you can't be moving around that much, otherwise if you just keep cutting, you're going to confuse your audience. So you want the action to take place and you want the viewer to experience it in a fashion that's similar to how you imagined it in the animatics. So what we did is, like I was saying, we put a whole bunch of cuts in there and realized this was a horrible idea. So pretty much everyone we showed it to was just confused. We weren't even telling the story, we were just showing a whole bunch of people different images and confusing them where they were. They're like, why am I over here, why am I over here? So we kind of had to do a lot of back and forth of where to put the cuts, make sure they're important. And so, what is a cut is basically we're trying to reposition the viewer so that they're looking where we hope they're looking. And so we did both. We did both extremes. We did a whole bunch of cuts, and then we did one version where there were no cuts. And in there, we kind of started to identify these important moments, and these are the moments that Jorge really wanted the viewer to be paying attention, like to look at this point right here. So we're like, okay, we've been following Jaguar in here. We need to reset and start looking, at this location. Also, we knew that this is a fight scene, which if you watch a traditional wrestling match or boxing match, there's lots of cuts. So can we play the first clip? Yes. And so we can sort of talk about how we took these cuts and kind of work them out. So again, the camera is very different in VR, so it's not like we're just taking a position and a lens and a certain framing and kind of working back and forth. But what we are doing is taking the same idea of not confusing the audience and keeping the action in front of you. So right here, there's two cuts that you're looking at. There's one where Son of Jaguar is throwing Lord Caravella out of the ring, and the camera takes you, there's a cut, and your position moves from right outside the ring to down in the arena floor. And what we ended up having to do was making sure that it's like in screen space, you're trying to keep something in the same screen space. It's not screen space, it's like in the same direction where the viewer's looking, making sure that we keep Calavera in that same place so that the audience doesn't get lost after the cut.
Yeah, gives you an anchor, keeps you grounded. So as long as you're following the action, you're watching Calavera through the air, you cut, but you're still watching Calavera, so it's not until he lands that you look around and realize you've been moved. Right. So it helps keep you stabilized.
And it's, from a story standpoint, what we wanted to do is you needed to be intimate with the characters in the ring, but we also wanted you to see this very important moment outside the ring. And then shortly later, which is the second cut, we needed you to get back in the ring so you can have another moment. And so these were the places where we realized we couldn't just leave you up on top of the ring and have you look down at the ground and then look back. We actually wanted you to be closer to that. So that was one of the cuts that we tried. And so a lot of what that meant was just a lot of iterations. And normally in a traditional layout process, you might do alternate takes and kind of different versions, but because this is VR, we had to, layout had to take place at multiple stages during the kind of the life of the performance. So they did an initial staging, we're like, okay, this cut kind of works, but then as soon as animation got their hands on it, that's when the timing really came into effect. So and it's just even in frames of animation, trying to make that cut work and make it feel good. It was a lot of work, and it was kind of covering new ground for us because everyone kind of had their idea of how it would work before we even started it. And then as soon as it really happened, it was just, okay, that's feeling good. And that's another thing that we kind of picked up, and this is something that the team at Google Spotlight Stories told us, is that there's not a lot of established rules for this type of storytelling. So you kind of have to try everything and kind of come to a quorum with the group of people that you're looking at and make a decision on whether that's working. So what really helped with that is that, we have a studio of all these artists that we've done lots of work with, we've done feature films with. We would just snag people randomly here and there and just make them watch stuff and kind of get their opinion. And it's not just, we didn't just show layout people, we showed everybody in the building that we could grab and put a headset on and say, hey, how are you feeling about this? And what we really wanted to do is make sure that as a viewer, you are not confused and lost like during the cut, because we're trying to tell a story. We're taking the time to make you follow Son of Jaguar as he's going through this. We don't want you to feel confused and upset and kind of, wait, where am I? Why am I here now? We want you to be watching the fight, being like, okay, now I'm looking at this part of the fight. Now I'm looking at this part, not looking at, okay, why am I on the ground? This feels weird. And then you've already lost the kind of the emotion of kind of what we were going for in the scene. So cuts were a tricky one, and that was one that, again, like when we started, it was a lot of cuts, then we did no cuts, and then we did some cuts, and it was a process of kind of going through it with Jorge and the team and making sure that all the cuts are in there, there's a good story reason why they're there, and we're doing our best job to put the viewer in a place where they can experience the action the way we want them to. Because you're not going to be able to assume that you shouldn't assume that a viewer is going to look where you want them to. You have to do everything you can to kind of suggest that they need to look there, whether it's turning all the lights off around them so there's only lights on the match, but they might be looking anywhere. So we kind of had to take that into account with some of the cuts. And so there were some of them where we ended up having to actually make use of kind of stealing the direction of where
There is, spoiler alert, there is some technology under the hood that, say when Calavera is getting thrown through the air, if you happen to be looking over here, wherever, when we move you, we also reorient you so that once we pop you somewhere, immediately Calavera is moving in your line of sight so you have something to look at. So again, it's not as jarring, it anchors you, it lets you know, oh, I'm somewhere else, but something's going on. This is more important than where I am.
And so we kind of took that same idea of making sure we didn't lose the audience when we were telling the story. And that also kind of translated over into camera moves, which is kind of another one of the big cuts in camera moves, are these huge layout challenges that we had to solve. And just like with camera cuts, we had our preconceived notions of how this was going to work in VR, and then we tried it and it just really didn't work. So we have a clip of a camera move here. This is probably the biggest camera move that we really had to solve. It was one of the top challenges to make sure it works, because the emotional core of the story is you are following Jaguar as he is meeting with his family in the boiler room, walking down this hallway that has all these wrestlers on the side, that had like old wrestlers on the side. There's an image of his father, the original Jaguar there, walking down with his son, having a moment at the sun before he goes out into the ring. And in order for we didn't want to use cuts, we wanted to use a camera move.
I'm starting the stream again, sorry.
All right, we crashed. Are we back?
Should be back, sorry guys.
Good to go?
Are we good?
Give it a second, I think you're good. Sorry, I'm trying to load.
Sorry, everybody. Technical difficulties.
So let me load just the walk real quick for you. Alright. Okay.
So anywho, this moment in the story, this was one of the most important moments for Jorge, because this is wrestler going out to not only face his nemesis, but possible spoiler alert, if you pay attention to the details, he's fully anticipating meeting his own demise.
Yeah, he's
facing
his mortality.
Yes, so it was very important that we get to go through this moment with him, the painful walk down the hallway, with his missing leg and saying goodbye to his father and also to his son. But yeah, so we needed to be there. And so, like Jeff was saying, we tried several different ways of going about this, and most of it boiled down to just testing on everyone we could find, all of our friends and family members,
canaries.
colleagues, loved ones, yes, canaries, guinea pigs, and eventually settling on something that worked in most scenarios. I mean, at the end of the day, there are a few people that are still uneasy with it, but we feel for the vast majority that it's there, and it was a necessary decision.
And specifically, so you start in the boiler room, you go down the hallway. Originally, we had this as basically an L move. It was like a move over a little bit to the right and then down the hallway. We tried this L move so many times and made so many people sick that we had to reconceive what we were actually doing. So what John ended up actually suggesting early on was, why don't we just move where the room is so we don't have to do the L, we just have to do a single line.
So we just rearranged the room. We moved the door. We changed the environment. We have that power in CG, fortunately. And yeah, I think the result ended up being
Yeah,
really
something
good.
we were really happy with. And another thing that was important for the scene was there's a couple moments that happen in the hallway. Son of Jaguar puts his hand on the wall. We wanted you to see that. And then he had a moment at the end of the hall with his son. We wanted you to see that. So just like with the cuts, we had to wait till animation basically did a really good pass before we could put our camera move in and make sure that you saw those moments. The other thing we really couldn't do was start and stop. That made, just like the L move that made people sick, the starting stopping really made people sick. So I think we lost more people on the starting stopping than anything we did. And again, if you're feeling sick and frustrated, you're not with Son of Jaguar as he's walking down the hallway. So that's when we ended up just basically just doing iterations and iterations. We probably did this hallway move over 100 times, showed it to everybody we could possibly get in there. We had a couple people that were really sensitive to camera moves, so we would always circle back to them. Jorge, funnily enough, was not sensitive to any type of crazy camera move, so he liked all of them. But then he'd be happy with it. We'd show people and they'd be like, "Whoa, I can't watch this," and we're like, "All right, I guess that is not what we want." So the people that were comfortable with the crazy moves, we kind of had to stop showing them because they weren't, helping us get to basically the best move to satisfy everybody. So that was one move that we really spent a lot of time on. There's also another camera move towards the end of Son of Jaguar where we've just brought you back into the ring to basically watch the kind of finale of the match, and we have a pull-out. And this was another one where we lost people real quick because initially the first pull-out we just kind of started and just had everyone kind of come up, and I would say over 50 people would just be like, "Whoa, I'm flying," and they would just take the headset off immediately. We're like, "No, you're supposed to be looking at Son of Jaguar and his family." Like, nope, it's moving too much. So then we that was kind of a too high of an angle. Then we put it kind of a shallower angle, but we were going into the stands. So we ended up finding kind of a sweet spot where there's still an incline, but you're not too high. The other thing that really helped out was we basically turned off all the house lights and left just the kind of spotlight on the wrestling ring so you could see Jaguar. So you weren't quite paying attention to how high up in the air you were. But that's another one where we kind of went back and forth on, how comfortable people are with that. And so it was just all part of us basically learning how we can take these concepts that we are so comfortable with in our 2D animation or 3D animation, but in a theatrical format, how comfortable we are with that, and translate it over into 3D, because it is, it's something that it was a challenge for us to solve, was get camera moves in there, get cuts in there, and make sure that you don't make people sick, and you're still telling a story, and then when people take off the headset at the end, they can tell you kind of what's going on. So, like I was saying, layout I think was the team that had to make the biggest change. But whereas layout was making most changes, we actually tried to find some other areas to basically leverage all of the workflow and background and experience that the members of our team had, which is where we got into how we were going to treat rigging and animation.
And this is where I'm most excited about the whole thing, is because, like he said, we wanted to give everyone the full tool set that they're used to in regards to rigging and animation. And so early on in the project, it was brought up that our buddies over at ATAP had been experimenting with using Alembic in the engine, and they used it to some degree, but for the most part, everything was FBX. But anybody who's worked with FBX knows that there's certain limitations, like it's all joint driven. There's no blend shapes. You can't do, what you're used to, like random deformers in Maya. But then we made the decision early on to just go ahead and say, hey, we're going to do Alembic for our main characters, which meant that the sky was the limit. It meant our rigging team could go in and use their full tool set that they're used to, make full-on film production quality rigs, and then hand those to our animation department, who just had all the bells and whistles that they could ever ask for. And I think if you look at the animation, hey, Justin, if you want to play the clip of our animation,
sure.
Like they basically just got to go hog wild. All the things, all the tenets of animation, like squash and stretch, hitting poses and silhouettes. Like it's all in there, and I feel like it really lends itself to the performance and the quality, and I feel like we've done something a little extra special with our animation.
Yeah, and it really was, working with Jorge and trying to figure out, what was the most important thing that he wanted when we were telling the story. And he was like, the animation has to be amazing. We have to find the best way to get the animators to not have to compromise any kind of performance so that we are watching the story that he wants to tell in VR. And so, like John was saying, what that really meant was we really didn't have to make that many compromises on the rig or animation. We didn't say, animation, you're not going to be able to do that, you're not going to be able to do that. Using Alembic, we were able to basically create a feature rig that we could put in like a theatrical feature, and the animators get all the controls they want. They can hit any pose they need to. They don't have to tell Jorge, oh no, we can't hit that pose, or that's going to be hard. Animation is challenging anyway, so having to give yourself extra constraints to kind of hone in on what you want, it's not helpful. So the more we could preserve that level of quality in animation, the better we were. And that was definitely a technical challenge that was both on our side and the Google Spotlight team side. That it was hard, but I think it was worth it.
Oh yeah, totally. But that's not to say animation wasn't without its challenges, because now all of a sudden you're in VR, and as we mentioned earlier, you, the viewer, are the camera, which means you can look everywhere. And so, like, for instance, this clip that we're showing right now, there's a fight scene going on between Son of Jaguar and Calavera. And that's where, obviously, a lot of effort was paid. But as the viewer, you can look over, and there's Rosa and Adrian and Baby on the side. And it was important that they also be animated at all times and always doing stuff and having their own little story arcs going on. And so that was a bit of a challenge to say, it's like, hey, everyone that's in there you're responsible for, even though you can't see, because we would set them up with some temp cameras to just kind of give them an idea so that they could do traditional 2D play blasts, so just we could see what the performance looked like in gist. But it wasn't until you went and put it on device and put on the headset and actually watched it that you realized, oh, this is what this all looks like.
Yeah, and it was definitely eye-opening, I think, for everybody on the team, and especially animation, to get used to viewing stuff on device, because I remember this particular scene, I watched it with some of the animators that were animating on this, and when I put the headset on, I was about 2 steps over to the left from the sweet spot where they had been kind of honing it in kind of 2D, and the animator was like, Jeff, you need to move over a couple steps to get the best view. And I was like,
no, bro.
You're not going to be there to tell the viewer to do that, so it has to work there. And that is something I think, just because, people in animation are such perfectionists that, they're used to kind of working to this perfect frame. And VR kind of loosens that up and it's like, yeah, well, I know you want the viewer to be looking here, but they might be looking anywhere. And we have, all these characters. There's a ref character, and I suggest that after you watch it a couple times, you should watch it and just follow him, because his animation is amazing. But that was one of the things that, as an animator, you're like, I'm spending all this time on this character, and not everyone's going to see him, right? And we're like, yeah, they might not, but they might. So it has to work when they look there. The piece has to work like a play that you're going to watch, a play in the round. So you can be anywhere, kind of, we have an idea of where we want you to be to kind of experience the story, but if you want to sit down, you can do that. And honestly, what we found is we had been watching it so many times that we knew what we were looking for. We'd always look in the right place. So just like we tapped into our pool of friends and colleagues to come take a look at this, and that's when we got most of the kind of the best feedback and the best reaction for, okay, here's a couple tweaks we need to be. It's funny enough, what we found was that you basically, if you didn't have a lot of experience in VR, you would kind of find someone to associate with. So both my kids, one's 3 and one's 7, they watched Adrian the entire time, which is Son of Jaguar's son. And I'd be like, look, there's a wrestling match over there. And they were like, yeah, but the kid is like my height and he's over here, so I'm gonna watch him. And we found like a lot of like correlation like that with different viewers coming in and viewing it. So what that really reinforced to us is that this is an event, this is a situation that's happening, and people want to kind of, you want to give them the freedom to look wherever they are. And that really is what is great about VR, is that there's this story, there's stuff going on, we want everyone to look here, but they can kind of look where they want to, and you need to be okay with that, and you need to make sure that it looks fantastic wherever they're looking.
And that was one of the great things about this being a Jorge project, is because he crams so much detail into everything you can honestly, if you want, you can just look at the floor the whole time you're watching the piece, and it'll be entertaining.
And it'll tell you
all
a
sorts
story.
of
Yeah,
stuff.
look, yeah. So there's, I mean, all of the locations. There's basically three. There's the arena. There's the boiler room. There's the hallway. There's all so much richness in there that, you know, as a surfacing artist, modeler, you're working on. It may not be something that you would see in a shot if this was a 2D theatrical short, but because it's VR, someone's going to turn around and look at the opposite direction of wherever the action is, and we wanted to make sure that looked fantastic. So we put a lot of effort into that and kind of really relied on the design and kind of all the animation in all our different departments to make sure that it worked, that it wasn't just a 2D short that we just threw into VR. It was actually a VR experience, and we were making use of the benefits of going into that type of medium.
And there are plenty of Easter eggs, so watch it multiple times.
So we have a question. Can
Yes.
you guys explain the WAP skinny?
The WAP Skinny. So this actually didn't make the final cut, but this was one of our really fantastic camera moves that needed to not just move us, but also turn us 90 degrees. So if you can imagine like a little macaroni noodle, we kind of needed to take this curve back and around. And we found, and this was when Calavera is getting introduced, so he's coming out of the skull and he's jumping in the air doing the fancy flip. And we found that as long as you're watching Calavera way up in the air, so your neck screened way back, and we move you, you won't notice because you're focusing on something that's, again, in the darkness. Your only point of reference is Calavera, and he's flipping and turning around anyway, so you don't even notice. And it turned out to be really successful, but in the end, it didn't help the story, so we ended up cutting it.
Yeah,
But-
and it was another one of those moments where we thought it was cool, and it was basically this problem we solved, this piece of technology.
We felt really smart.
Yeah, we felt great about it, but then in the end, we're like, guys, do we really need this? Do we really need to be moving people more? And so that was just all part of the process where, we would get so used to something the way it was, and then realize, you know what, there's probably a simpler way, and we really had to kind of think outside of our normal workflows to kind of achieve that. Yeah.
What else you got?
What is your favorite Easter egg that we should be on the lookout for?
I mean, I would say that if you look at any of the environments, just take some time to look at the posters in the boiler room. There's all this detail in there. The boilers in there all telling a story. You know, watch it through so you kind of see where you're looking for. But then go through it another time and just look at the environments and look at the floor, see how the tiles are broken out. And the hallway itself is just a work of art. It might be hard to watch every single wrestling mask as you're going down the hallway, but look at them all. They all tell a story. They're amazing.
They're all special to
Oh,
each
yeah.
supervisor.
Yeah.
Yes.
By the way, it's all
The
the
leads.
wrestlers in the hallway are us.
They're all the leads from the project, which is
Yes.
cool.
So, and then fans of Jorge, which I consider myself one, will, if you're familiar with El Tigre and Book of Life, keep an eye out. There's some stuff out there that you will find.
Yes. Do you have any advice for artists and animators that want to create for VR? What are some rules of thumb they need to be thinking about?
I mean, honestly, the biggest thing is just put the headset on as soon as you can.
Yes, in device, on device, on device, on device, on device.
Like watch it on
it's
device?
like you need
Yeah.
to be in the headset as soon as you've got something, because as soon as you think you've got it all worked out, you put on the headset and it's like, oh no, this doesn't work at all.
Well, and even if you're figuring out the scale of the assets, because we had to do that a lot with Son of Jaguar and Calavera, is like, we think this is big enough, but how does it really feel? So, we reviewed a turntable of the model, and it looks amazing, and we were thinking, okay, he's a certain height. And then, when we just put him in the headset and we're standing next to him, we're like, man, these guys are larger than life. And then when you put Lord Calavera in there, he's towering over everybody. Like, maybe if you're 7 feet,
Yeah.
you can look him in the eye. But what that helped is kind of inform animation, inform everybody, like, these guys are big, so we want to make sure we're a certain distance from them to kind of make sure you feel that. So it's not like they're these small characters that are far away. They're big, larger than life. You want to be close enough so that you kind of really feel that, how big and imposing, especially Calavera, because I mean that, he is our villain. We want you to not, he's not soft and cuddly. You need to get next to him and kind of see how big he is.
But yeah, I would say also it's like be willing to compromise and focus on what's important. So like as a for instance, the boiler room originally was supposed to be really tiny to offset the fact that wrestler's really big. Like he was supposed to look really awkward and uncomfortable in that space. But once we put us in there as the viewer, we also need room for him to get around and not come through us. And so at the end of the day, we had to make the boiler room probably twice the size that we originally envisioned it. But at the same time, you get all the richness, you get all the depressing qualities that we were going for.
Yeah.
So.
And just like with, I mean, this could just be general for any kind of animated project or short film you're working on, is it's worth it to go through and do a color key and kind of like a style pass. So we worked with Paul Sullivan, who did our color keys, and they were amazing. We could have taken those into any kind of feature film. They were great. But what they did is at that early step, they identified the story moments that we wanted to hit with color and lighting, and making sure that we reinforce, what layout and what animation was doing, but kind of having, you have a short, you might have storyboarded. It doesn't have to be amazing color keys like and color looks like Paul Sullivan did. It can be, it could just be simple colors, but basically saying, this is, during this part of the sequence, we want to use this level of saturation, these type of colors, and by the time this moment happens, we want to switch to this, so that you're not just telling a story in animation, you're also telling it with color. And I know sometimes when you're thinking in VR, you're like, well, maybe that's not important. It is important. It's always important. So making sure that you take the time to, just like you would with a theatrical short film or any kind of 2D animation, is making sure that you're not waiting to the end to figure out what color everything is.
So we have some questions about Olympic Flash.
All right.
So along the lines of the win you got from using Olympic for integrating animation smoothly, what's next for VR pipeline tech?
Oh my goodness. In my pipe dream, so our next thing would be more interactive review possibilities. Because usually animation to review on device was always in context. So we could set up separate clips here and there, but really it was, at the end of the day, with time constraints, really you would just build the whole story and you would just see what was going on. But if we could, the next thing for me would be to integrate those controllers so I can pause, fast forward, rewind, set a marker, and just watch my animation over and over and over.
I think any VR director would love that. They would pay millions of dollars for that.
And they're
I would like it.
So
that's coming.
Because when we watch this, Son of Jaguar, when we're working on it, we would basically watch it all the way through every single time, and you get to this moment and be like, "Hey, did you see that? That looked weird. Did you see that pop?" It's like, well, I'll wait till the next go round, because it's not something where you can, when you're looking at something on some kind of image viewer or frame cycler or RV, and you're going back and forth, you can kind of scrub and go back and take a look at this and check that. Now, with most of the VR packages and the way you kind of handle these experiences, you're not able to do that as much. So I think that's one thing that would be greatly helpful and kind of sort of speed up iterations and kind of solving the problems. Well, and then the other thing would happen is, there might be, for instance, let's say a texture was popping on this doorway, and the doorway was behind you, so you had to watch the whole short and watch it, and then I would always catch myself I'm gonna watch the animation, I don't care about this door. It's like, dude, you have to watch the door, because we have to fix it, we gotta find where that's happening. So yeah, that was kind of a new challenge for me that I wasn't quite ready for, is just, I'm gonna take a look at it and make sure I see any popping, any kind of weird tech glitches we gotta fix. But instead, I would get so wrapped up in the story every time that it would be hard to look away.
Yeah. And you couldn't really call out a frame that it was popping on. You just
Nope.
kind of say,
No.
it pops at this point,
Yeah.
and trying to explain that to an artist was not easy.
Absolutely.
This is from Facebook, and the comment is, it's so fluid. What really made that happen? I'm not sure what it's in reference to, but I'm thinking just the...
Probably the action. So I mean, that's
Yeah,
one thing that it sounds like y'all fought to get, is that natural feeling movement of a camera dolly, without the jarring feeling of that your body's not moving, but your visual space is moving.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the camera movements, it's I give all that to our layout guys. I mean, like Jeff was saying, they just tried every which way until they found the one that worked.
And then, with animation, I think Olympic is what really was able to basically translate those, all those positions of the character at every frame so that, you know, we're used to evaluating stuff on a 2D screen, but taking that same concept of step by step looking at it and making that type of smooth animation move into the piece. And it was something that we knew when we did it, it was going to be hard, but we knew it would be worth it, especially on the animation side. And I think it paid dividends for us, because that's the thing we were most excited about, was, you know, getting this wrestling match going and making this fight scene so dynamic and awesome, but having to follow the kind of the rules of VR and not necessarily doing all these cuts, but there's this amazing fight scene going on, and you can kind of look wherever you want and almost be your own cinematographer. It was fantastic.
And then also, if it's in terms of like the animation, because, you know, as you'll notice, every character is animated from beginning to the end of the piece, which we wind up being 7 minutes.
Something like that, yeah.
Mhm.
But we broke that up into what we call beats, basically, using
Yeah.
in our pipeline shots. But, you know, animator would be responsible for all of the characters from, you know, this frame until this frame, and then it would have to meet up with the next frame, and then for that next animator's beat. But we have a really tightly knit animation crew that basically was communicating, was sharing their poses. So someone who's got the end of this beat that hooks up with the next beat, they're sharing their pose with the other guys, talking about, you know, what they were doing, where they were going, and everyone's just working together.
Well, and also just having to make sure that we called them shots so that we could break them up and handle them with our animation team. But when you're watching the experience, there's no shots. Everything's all together. So at the end of one shot, the character had to be in the exact same position, and the motion had to carry through. So that was another one of the challenges that I think animation did a really good job on. That was one that I was worried early on, but honestly, just because they got to know the characters so well during this experience, that they were able to communicate that. But it was not easy. It was a lot of keeping track and making sure, you know, because it would be little things. It'd be like Rosa would be looking up at the end of one animator's shot, and then over here in the next, and then we kind of had to be like, well, all right, how do we actually, so maybe you should change the last 30 frames of this one and then transition into this moment in this shot. So, which is, you know, when you're just doing, you know, an animated feature film, you can just add a cut in there, and as long as, you know, it's close, the audience buys it. But because you are staring at this character, they can't pop, they can't move. It has to be the same. Otherwise, you're gonna give away like how we were able to achieve it and not feel like this is a character performing.
Are there any VR films or experiences that you guys have enjoyed or learned from, or maybe reference that you guys used while on this project?
I mean, we obviously checked out all of the Google Spotlight stories. I mean, Pearl is amazing, and I would suggest you go check that one out, just like you're gonna if you check out Son of Jaguar. We also watched Dear Angelica. That was a great one for us to. Basically, I didn't have a lot of experience with VR, so I just kind of jumped in, and I found that one to be very moving and kind of really open up what what the type of experience that I wanted to kind of see and what I wanted to bring to Jorge's story. Jorge is a big movie watcher, so he always has movies that he wants us to watch for any production you're working on. So there was a wide gamut on this one. So I know for The Wrestler, the Darren Aronofsky film, that was one that was really helpful for watching just for character. Rocky 3, actually any Rocky movie, but I think Rocky 3 was the one that I found the most, and then Creed. And that one was kind of really did help inform sort of the feeling we were going for, because there is some amazing cinematography in Creed, and finding a way to take that same idea in those fight scenes and kind of get it working in VR. So it still had, it's not that we're not going to be able to move the camera, and actually in Creed there's a couple long takes, but it's I mean, I love seeing reference like that, and then I love when a director, and Jorge does this all the time, is just kind of give us movies to think about. It's like, this sequence, you should be thinking about this. This is a kind of a mood piece that you should watch. Don't copy it, but there was, a lot of, and then, all kinds of comic book poses. And if you are a video game fan, there's a lot of Street Fighter references in here. Particularly, the animators looked at a lot of Street Fighter 4. So they kind of covered all gamuts, but I mean, I think that's what most of the biggest influences I remember.
Back to some picking camera angles.
Yes.
Can you guys talk about the previous process for picking camera angles, and if there were any epiphanies from taking a wildly different POV?
So I will say that there definitely was a lot of those. So the first one that I kind of alluded to earlier was do a version with no cuts at all, so where you're just sitting somewhere and watching the whole action, and that really does help evaluate what you're looking at. The other thing that you can do, and just because this is rendered in engine, is you can scale down the action so you can watch it in a wider angle. Because if you're at caliber, if you're Son of Jaguar size, but in the audience watching it, that's one thing. But if you can kind of stand over everything and kind of view how the action's going, that's really helpful. And I think that's something that I would have never ever thought in a million years to try, but it really did help. The more you can kind of put the headset on and kind of think about, like, how do I want to view this fight? Where's the sweet spot for me to stand so that this action looks great? Is having that version. And we did for this particular for the fight, we rendered a camera standing on the post of every corner to make sure that the fight looked great from all those, but also just to make sure that we were looking at the best. We were putting the viewer in the best place to kind of experience the fight. Yeah.
Well, we haven't gotten any more questions, but do you guys have anything that you want to add, or?
I have
No.
another good one for
What's
you.
that?
Yeah.
So we were talking about, you'll have a film background, we're used to working in a 2D space. What were some other 2D animation techniques that you brought to the table for us that you were surprised actually worked almost the way you expected them to?
Funny enough, there is a couple of little moments that happen in the short where there's some, we would do like a little 2D effect of a word showing up or some little symbols going up that I think we almost complicated it too much when we were envisioning them, where we ended up just taking a 2D animation sequence and putting on a card and just finding a good place to play it, because we're like, oh, that's going to look terrible, it's going to look fake, but it really kind of helped add to the story, and it was like you had to put them in the right spot, and you did have to make sure that they worked wherever you were looking, but it was kind of a cheat that I didn't think would fly in VR. I was like, oh, this is not going to work. But then as soon as we started doing that, like, we wanted to find more places to put that type of stuff in, for sure.
Because we've got that clip of the fight scene. What
Yes.
did we end up when he gets smacked in the face and his tongue's flying out? What did we end up doing for that? Was that a cone?
Yes, so
Okay,
that was
yeah.
another one, when the animator was working on this shot, he ended up kind of coming up with this idea. His name is Randy Hayes, so I'll give him a plug for this. But he did this kind of cone effect spinning, and it looked awesome in 2D, and then Jorge was like, guys, how are we going to make this work? And so there was a lot, we had to ask
Right here.
Boom. Yeah, right there, that cone, which also looks great when you're looking at it as a 2D play blast, but we're like, man, how's that going to work? And so we actually took that particular challenge and kind of enlisted the help of our friends over at ATAP, at Google Spotlight Stories. And Cassidy Curtis spent a lot of time finding a way to make that cone work as an element in VR. So there's a lot of technical wizardry going on to actually translate that and make it over. Even though it seems like, there's a cone behind the character spinning. It's a little more complicated than that. But it was a great idea, and it was actually one of these little flourishes that I love that we were able to kind of get in there.
Cool. Anything else?
But yeah, I guess that's it. We can wrap. As we said, it's available now on Steam, so go and download. I can tell you, obviously I'm biased because I worked on the piece, but as a supervisor, I've seen the thing probably 500 times, if not 1,000, like ad nauseum. Yet every time I watch it, makes me smile, makes me laugh. So I really, truly think we've created something special. So please go check it out.
Yeah, and this was me and John love talking about Son of Jaguar, so we can always talk about it. So this was definitely been a treat for us. So we like to thank you guys for listening. Thank Flight School for inviting us to talk about it. And of course, thank Jorge for letting us be a part of this story. It was, it was a personal story to him, but all of us, all the artists that worked on it, had a really good time working on it, and Jorge just brings that out of everybody. But it really was a fantastic show. It was not easy, it was hard, but it was that good kind of hard that you love doing, and love working on any type of project with Jorge. So I really feel we're really happy with kind of how this turned out. So make sure you check it out. Make sure you keep an eye out for November 17th for when it becomes available on the Google Spotlight Stories app for both iOS and Android. And I think that kind of wraps it up for us. I will say that if you guys are in Burbank next week for CTN, make sure to stop by the VR hangar to visit with Flight School and take a look at, they have some animation shorts that they've curated for you to check out.
Wait, there was one more plug. AIF?
No, CTN.
No.
CTN.
It was-
CTN. Be there.
All right.
But make sure, go check it out on Steam, watch it many times, also get it on iOS and Android and watch it many times.
Okay, I guess we can put on our
All right.
sombreros.
Woohoo!
Yes.
Ole!
Oh, that's it.
All right, everybody.
All right. Thank you guys.
Thanks for tuning in.